There is a special silence that is unique to the Alaskan winter, where temperatures drop to 40 degrees and the night lasts 19 hours. In this silence, every step in the deep snow requires enormous effort. Every night could be your last, and despair becomes as constant a companion as the cold. It is in this merciless silence that a story begins that forces us to rethink the limits of the human will to live, and that invisible line where survival becomes an art form. The Matanuska-Susneta Valley is located in south-central Alaska, about 50 miles north of Anchorage. Locals call it simply Mat-Su, a vast area carved out by glaciers thousands of years ago and surrounded by the snow-capped peaks of the Denali Mountains. It is a land of contrasts. In summer, the valley blooms with lush forests and meadows, while in winter it turns into a frozen kingdom of snow and ice. In the winter of 2019, the Mat-Su Valley fell into its usual torpor. Temperatures regularly dropped to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and the day shrank to a measly 5 hours of daylight. Snow doesn't just fall here. It piles up, creating 3-foot drifts that make any movement an exhausting struggle. In such conditions, distance is measured not in miles, but in hours or days of travel. For those seeking solitude, this land offers it in abundance. In these parts, neighbors can live 5 miles apart without knowing of each other's existence for years. The nearest roads are 43 miles away, and help in case of trouble can take weeks to arrive. Here, nature is not just an element of the landscape, it is the rightful master, setting its own ruthless rules. In this remote corner of the planet, one man tested how thin the line is between the dream of freedom and the struggle for survival. His story began as the embodiment of the American dream of living on the land, and ended as a lesson in human endurance and strength of spirit, when one mistake turned a winter paradise into an icy trap from which escape seemed almost impossible. Tyson Steele did not set out to become a survival hero. At 30, he was looking for a simple life away from civilization, where he could make his own rules. Raised in Utah, Tyson had always craved independence and adventure. Before Alaska, his life was like a journey. He traveled to different countries, took on various jobs, never staying in one place for long. In his wanderings, he sought his path and freedom. In 2018, he bought 40 acres of land in the Mat-Su Valley without ever seeing it in person. When Tyson first saw his property from the air, he found what he had been searching for years, a sense of boundless freedom. The valley with the snow-capped peaks of Denali on the horizon became a symbol of his new life. The plane dropped him off 2 miles from the property, and he had to walk the rest of the way through the wilderness. While exploring his territory, Tyson made an unexpected discovery: a cabin where Mike Loeffler, a hermit who had lived there for nearly 2 decades, had made his home. Their meeting blossomed into a friendship. Tyson spent his evenings listening to the Vietnam veteran's stories about life away from society. Loeffler, a lonely man with his own history of escaping civilization, saw a kindred spirit in Tyson. The first month in Alaska was a test for Tyson, testing his determination and ability to adapt to the harsh conditions. Returning briefly to his relatives, he learned that Mike Loeffler had died of cancer. The executors of his will offered Tyson the opportunity to buy the hermit's land. This expanded his holdings to 80 acres, including Loeffler's cabin. In September 2019, Tyson returned to Alaska with the firm intention of staying. His only companion was Phil, a 6-year-old Labrador retriever weighing 50 kilograms, who had become not just a pet, but a true friend. Loeffler's cabin, a simple Quonset-style structure with a plastic roof and canvas walls, became their home. It was far from ideal, but it symbolized a new beginning. Tyson was not a reckless dreamer. With survival skills learned from his hunter grandfather, experience working in a camping store, and 2 years' worth of food supplies, he was seriously preparing for life in the wilderness. Every 10 to 30 days, he sent messages to his family via satellite communication, and planned to receive a Christmas package. He spent his first months in the Matsu Valley preparing for winter. Tyson chopped wood, organized supplies, and gradually got used to the rhythm of life away from civilization. Phil enjoyed his freedom, exploring the area around the cabin. By mid-December 2019, Tyson had completely settled into his new life. He had no idea that his life was about to be turned upside down, and that all the skills he had acquired would be put to the ultimate test. On the night of December 18th, Tyson woke up from the cold. It was around 1 a.m., the fire in the stove had gone out, and the temperature in the cabin was dropping rapidly. Going out to get some firewood, Tyson felt the fatigue and cold numbing his movements. Returning to the freezing hut, he made a decision that would change his entire life. He threw cardboard into the stove to get the fire going faster. Crawling back into bed, Tyson began to fall asleep, but something was bothering him. Behind his closed eyelids, it was getting lighter, as if dawn were breaking, even though there were still several hours to go. Opening his eyes, he saw a nightmare, a hole in the ceiling, from which burning plastic was dripping. Acting quickly, Tyson grabbed a bucket of water and an old fire extinguisher. One bucket of water wasn't enough, and the fire extinguisher didn't work. The fire spread at a terrifying speed, engulfing the plastic roof and canvas walls of the hut. Running outside, Tyson saw his house turning into a ball of fire against the black sky. Then he realized the terrible truth. Phil was still inside. He rushed back into the shack, trying to make his way to the room where he had last seen the dog. The heat and smoke were unbearable, and burning debris was falling from above. Tyson called out to Phil, but the dog, frightened by the fire, had cowered in a corner and wasn't moving. A wall of flames prevented him from getting closer. With pain in his heart, Tyson had to retreat. The fire literally pushed him out of the hut. Once outside, he heard Phil's howls, a sound filled with pain and fear. Tyson tried to find another entrance, but it was too late. The roof began to collapse, and the ammunition stored in the hut exploded. The howling stopped, and silence fell, broken only by the crackling of burning wood and the hissing of melting snow. Standing in front of the burning ruins of his home, wearing thermal underwear and boots without socks, Tyson realized the scale of the disaster. His home, his belongings, his supplies, his connection to the outside world, everything was gone in the flames. But the most painful loss was Phil, his loyal friend. Tyson screamed desperately, but alas, no one heard him in the deserted valley. The temperature dropped below 20 degrees, and he knew he had to act immediately, or he would freeze to death. He spent the first hours after the fire trying to save what he could from the flames. Risking burns, he grabbed everything he could from the fire. His sleeping bag, a few cans of food, his rifle. Adrenaline temporarily numbed the cold, but Tyson knew it wouldn't last. By dawn, the fire began to subside. In the corner where Tyson had last seen Phil lay the charred body of the dog. The image was etched into his memory, intensifying the guilt he would have to live with for the rest of his life. When the sun lit up the valley, he saw the full extent of the destruction. Only a charred skeleton remained of the hut. He managed to salvage about 60 cans of food. Many were burned and burst open, their contents mixed with plastic and ash. Standing amid the ruins, with limited food supplies and minimal clothing, Tyson realized the harsh reality. The nearest settlement was 43 miles away across an impassable winter desert. He had no map, no snowshoes, and no communication. He had sent his last message to his family a few days ago, and no one would worry about him for at least another week. The life he had built with such enthusiasm had turned into a nightmare overnight. Now his home was snow and ice, and every dawn was a new victory over death. Tyson's first enemy was time. At 4 degrees, a person without shelter has only hours before hypothermia sets in. Armed with a shovel from Loeffler's barn, he began digging a snow cave. His structure, covered with tarps and boards, became his first shelter. He spent the first 2 nights in this makeshift shelter, falling into a restless sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, Tyson saw the burning hut and heard Phil's last howl. During the day, he returned to the smoldering remains of the hut. Among the ruins, Tyson discovered a partially damaged wood-burning stove, a discovery that proved to be a turning point. The stove could provide constant heat if he built a shelter around it. Tyson spent the next few days building a more reliable shelter. He dug a hole in a snowy hill and installed the salvaged stove there. He built a frame out of broken boards and covered it with tarpaulin and insulation materials from the barn. The roof was a structure made of boards, plastic, and snow. The physical ordeal was compounded by psychological torment. He was haunted by guilt over Phil's death. Constant vigilance and lack of sleep were wearing on his nerves. He often woke up in the night in a panic, imagining another fire, grabbing his sleeping bag, and ready to run. Tyson's diet was meager. 2 salvaged cans a day, often with a taste of plastic and smoke. A found can of coffee became a real treasure. Tyson joked that the fire had turned it into an extra dark roast, just the way he liked it. This small comfort became a ritual, a reminder of normal life. The loneliness was particularly acute. The loss of Phil left a void that nothing could fill. Tyson talked to himself to hear a human voice, sang songs, told himself stories from his childhood, anything to fill the oppressive silence that surrounded him in the Matsu Valley. On the 10th day of survival, Tyson faced a critical problem. His sources of fire were failing. The acetylene burner stopped working, and the flint starters he found in the barn were frozen and wouldn't spark. That night, the temperature dropped below 22 degrees Celsius, and Tyson realized the danger. Without a reliable source of fire, his days were numbered. Rummaging through the items in Loeffler's shed, he found a can of gasoline. With a knife in his hand, Tyson went to the nearest birch tree and began to strip off the bark, one of the best natural materials for starting a fire. After soaking the bark with a small amount of gasoline and using his last match, he created a reliable source of flame. This success gave Tyson new strength. Realizing that rescue might not come soon, he began to create signals for potential rescuers. In the open space near his shelter, he stamped huge letters SOS in the snow and sprinkled the outlines with ash from the burned-down hut to make them visible from the air. After each snowfall, he restored the signal. Another strategic decision was to make a trail to a frozen lake a mile from the camp. Tyson knew that this was the only place where a plane could land in winter. Without snowshoes, sinking into deep snow, he cleared a path over several days. Time began to blur. To maintain his connection to reality, Tyson marked the days with chalk on the stove wall and devised a greeting system. Every morning he wrote, "Welcome to the world, Day X." This simple routine gave structure to his existence. The turning point came when fighter jets appeared over the valley conducting exercises. 2 powerful aircraft circled high in the sky, their engines echoing in the mountains. Tyson ran out into the open, waving his arms and shouting hoarsely. But the pilots were too high to notice the lone figure. After an hour of futile attempts, he watched as the planes turned and disappeared over the horizon, taking with them any hope of early rescue. This was a serious test of spirit. The feeling that he had been seen and ignored, even if mistakenly, was a heavy psychological blow. It was at that moment that Tyson realized he had to be prepared for a long period of isolation, possibly until the end of winter. Christmas was approaching, or so Tyson thought, having lost track of the days. The air seemed warmer, and low gray clouds hung over the valley. He allowed himself a small celebration, an extra serving of canned peaches. Sitting by the stove, Tyson sang Christmas carols, looking at the snow-capped peaks of Denali and imagining his family around the holiday table. But the sky remained empty, and by evening, the bitter realization dawned on him that no one knew of his plight. No Christmas plane, no rescue team. That night was one of the hardest, testing his determination to keep fighting. The following days brought new challenges. His firewood supplies began to dwindle. forcing Tyson to make increasingly longer trips. His old knee injury flared up from the constant strain, and every movement was accompanied by pain. But he couldn't stop. Movement meant life. Sleep became a luxury. The need to keep the fire going forced him to wake up every few hours to throw wood on the stove. This intermittent sleep pattern exacerbated his physical and mental exhaustion. Another blow was the discovery that some of the cans he had saved contained unexpected items. Instead of nutritious stewed meat, there was sometimes tomato sauce or mayonnaise, foods that were hardly suitable for maintaining strength in extreme conditions. Exhaustion began to take its toll on his mental state. He realized that he was starting to lose his mind and fought against it. Not like in the movies, but for real. The hardest test was realizing his own vulnerability. A man who dreamed of independence was forced to admit that complete isolation was not a romantic adventure, but a daily struggle where every day the scales could tip against you. And yet, even in the most difficult moments, Tyson found the strength to notice the beauty of the world around him. The frosty patterns on the walls of his shelter, the silence of the snow-covered valley on rare sunny days, the northern lights painting the night sky. All this gave him the emotional strength to continue the struggle. By the 20th day of his ordeal, Tyson had almost lost track of time. The days merged into a monotonous routine of survival, keeping the fire going, searching for firewood, cooking, and restoring the SOS signals. His beard was covered with ice, and his body was saturated with the smell of smoke and sweat. But his inner core remained untouched. Every morning, he continued to mark another day of victory over the elements with chalk on the stove. Tyson began the morning of January 9th, 2020, with his usual ritual. He lit a fire in the stove and cooked burnt oatmeal from a salvaged can. As he stirred the dark mass, a distant rumble reached his ears. At first, he thought he was hearing fighter jets again, but the sound was different, lower, more measured, approaching. It was a helicopter. After 23 days of isolation, Tyson was afraid to hope, but his instincts took over. Random aircraft rarely appeared in this area. If a helicopter was here, it meant it was looking for him. Without wasting a second, Tyson grabbed his boots, threw on his jacket, and ran out into the open. Soon he saw an Alaska State Trooper's helicopter circling above his plot. His heart was pounding like crazy. This was not a hallucination or a dream. Tyson began to make the international SOS signal, raising his arms above his head, then spreading them out to the sides, and raising them again. At the same time, he pointed toward the lake, where he had prepared a landing site. Pilot Cliff Gilliland noticed his signals and directed the helicopter toward the lake. The moment Tyson heard the sound of the helicopter landing was almost surreal. After 3 weeks of absolute solitude, the prospect of human contact seemed surreal. He froze for a moment, then his legs automatically carried him forward along the path he had carved out with such difficulty. Tactical Officer Zach Johnson, the first to spot Tyson approaching, was stunned. With his long, tangled hair, icy beard, and soot-covered face, he resembled a character from the movie The Outlaw. But what really surprised the officer was Tyson's lack of signs of frostbite and his relatively cheerful state of mind. As the helicopter lifted off the ground, Tyson allowed himself one last look at the place that had been his prison and testing ground for 23 days. He saw his shelter, the smoldering remains of his hut, and the SOS he had stamped into the snow, evidence of his struggle and resilience. At that moment, the emotions he had held back for so long came flooding back, and tears of relief rolled down his face. Tyson Steele's rescue was made possible by a lucky combination of circumstances and the vigilance of his loved ones. When he failed to get in touch by New Year's Eve, his family sounded the alarm. It was unusual for Tyson, who was used to sending messages every 10 to 30 days. His relatives contacted the pilot who usually delivered packages to remote areas and asked him to check on the situation. He contacted the authorities, and Alaska State Troopers sent a helicopter to investigate. Pilot Cliff Gilliland and Officer Zach Johnson first noticed smoke from Tyson's campfire. then huge letters spelling out SOS in the snow. These signals, which Tyson had so carefully maintained even when it seemed futile, ultimately saved his life. After landing in Lake Hood near Anchorage, Tyson was offered a shower, a simple luxury he had dreamed of for 23 days. Officers then fulfilled his food fantasy by buying him a McDonald's egg and sausage sandwich and a Big Mac. Tyson eagerly devoured his first unburned food in 3 weeks, while recounting his story to the astonished officers. A medical examination confirmed this observation. Despite the harsh conditions, Tyson had not suffered any serious physical injuries. Some weight loss, minor frostbite on his nose and fingers, general exhaustion, but nothing that couldn't be remedied with proper nutrition and rest. Tyson's story spread quickly. A video of his rescue went viral, and media outlets around the world, from the Washington Post to the BBC, picked up the story of his incredible survival. People were amazed by the resilience of a man who not only stayed alive, but also kept a clear head in conditions that many would not have survived for even a few days. After several days in Anchorage, Tyson decided to return to Utah to be with his family. He needed time to recover physically and, more importantly, psychologically. The loss of Phil had left a deep emotional wound that only time could begin to heal. But even at his most exhausted, Tyson did not give up on his dream. In an interview, he mentioned that he planned to return to Alaska and rebuild his homestead. Not right away, but when he was ready. Because despite all the trials and tribulations, Matsu had become his home. Tyson's return to normal life was met with mixed reactions. His story, which received widespread media coverage, brought not only admiration, but also criticism. Some compared him to Chris McCandless from the book Into the Wild, suggesting that he was unprepared for life in the wilderness. Tyson strongly rejected these comparisons. "I'm not McCandless. He left with no plan, no food, and no experience. I had 80 acres of land with equipment and 2 years' worth of food. The circumstances were completely different." Indeed, analysis of the situation confirmed his words. Tyson was not a reckless dreamer. His preparation, inspired by his hunter grandfather and backed by years of practical experience, was thorough. Most experts agreed that it was this preparation, methodical approach, and positive attitude that allowed him to survive an ordeal that would have broken many others. The physical effects of the ordeal quickly disappeared. Tyson regained the weight he had lost, and his frostbite healed without complications. But the emotional scars took longer to heal. Dreams of Phil and the burning cabin haunted him for months. Working with his family dog in Utah became an important part of his emotional recovery. Gradually, Tyson found ways to cope with his guilt over Phil, realizing that he had done everything possible in that situation. "Humor was a crucial factor in my survival." Tyson shared his lessons. Maintaining a positive attitude and finding reasons to smile can make a huge difference. This ability to find the positive even in the darkest circumstances became a defining feature of Tyson's story. While many would have focused on their losses, he actively sought beauty in his surroundings. "Everything around me was beautiful, even in the worst moments. It's important to find beauty wherever you can, even in the midst of tragedy." Tyson Steele's story has entered the annals of survival as a reminder that sometimes the greatest trials reveal the best in us. That methodicalness and a positive attitude can overcome even the most impossible obstacles, and that sometimes the most important victories are those we win over our own fear and despair. As he himself said, "When you go through something like that, the simple things take on a new value. A cup of hot coffee, a warm bed, human interaction, all the things we take for granted suddenly become precious." Tyson Steele's story makes us think about the fine line between adventure and recklessness, between preparation and luck. In a world where we are increasingly distancing ourselves from nature, stories like this remind us of its power and indifference to human ambition. What do you think? Was Tyson a true survival hero, or did he just get lucky? Can his actions be considered an example to follow or a warning? And the most interesting question, if you were in his position, what would you have done? I'm very interested in your opinion. Tyson mentioned Chris McCandless, a comparison he so vehemently rejected. Be sure to check out our video about McCandless. The link will appear on the screen right now. Two destinies, two stories about life in the Alaskan wilderness, but with fundamentally different approaches and, of course, different endings. If you enjoyed this story, please support the channel. Like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories about the most incredible tests of the human spirit. Your support helps us create content about those who challenge the impossible. Take care, and see you in the next episodes.